Hi, I'm George, one of the hosts of the Green Room podcast. We often say that going round in circles is a bad thing, but what if it's actually a good thing, especially for our planet? Episode 45, we talked about the circular economy and how we can use this new model to help combat climate change, waste, and even pollution. We were joined by Hege Sæbjørnsen, who told us all about her work making IKEA a more circular business, and James Pennington, our very own circular economy specialist. From dropping off your old Billy bookcase to why we need to get the milkman back, we learned so much from this conversation. You can listen to previous episodes on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment below, letting us know your thoughts on today's topic. Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte. This is a podcast where we ask tricky questions about the world around us. I'm George Parrett, and this episode we're asking, would more of us thrive in a circular economy? Hello and thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. You can find all of our previous episodes on our website, which is deloitte.co.uk/Green Room Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And today we're talking about the circular economy, which I don't really know an awful lot about, but fortunately I've got my very well-rounded colleague and co-host Ethan Worth on here today. How are you, Ethan?
I'm good, George. Not sure what you're implying by well-rounded, but I'll take it. No, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling refreshed and ready to go for the new series and excited for this episode.
So I'm feeling fairly well-rounded after the Christmas break. We're talking about the circular economy, and I think it's this is a big topic. Hopefully something which we can all be thinking about in the future, and something for the year ahead as well. But who do we have in the studio with us today, Ethan, to talk us through it?
So as usual, we're joined by two esteemed guests. The first one on my list is Hege Sæbjørnsen. She's Global Circular Strategy Lead at Ingka Group, the largest franchisee of IKEA. As part of the group sustainability team, she leads the business's circular strategy across 32 markets globally. Prior to this, Hege was responsible for the global sustainability strategy at IKEA UK and Ireland. Welcome, Hege.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we're also joined by James Pennington. James is an associate director in our ESG advisory team, leading the firm's circular economy strategy across the UK. Prior to joining Deloitte, James worked at the World Economic Forum, managing the organization's circular economy initiative and its environmental work in China. Welcome, James.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
And what happens now is a bit of an icebreaker is we will get a random question that pops up on our screen. So what was the last nice or helpful thing someone did for you?
I think what's the nicest thing someone's done for me? I've recently it was very cold the other day, and I was trying to de-ice my car, and I didn't have any sort of de-icer or anything. So my neighbour did come along with a hot kettle and some de-icer as well, and a scraper. So I was completely out of anything sensible to try and de-ice my car. But fortunately, I live in a lovely street with some lovely neighbours, and brings joy to the world, I think, when that sort of thing happens. So that's something nice which I experienced recently.
So I think I do have one. So I think so recently we just moved into a new house, and there's lots of work to do, and we've been trying to do the front garden. And we'd ordered some topsoil and some stones to put on the front garden, and we slightly miscalculated the size of the packaging. It sort of came as about a ton's worth in the end. It was a bit mysterious. So it was craned in, and it's now we share a drive with our neighbour, and it's blocking kind of the neighbour's part of the drive. And the neighbours very kindly said we can leave it there, and we don't have to try and move our big ton of topsoil and stones, which is good because I couldn't anyway. So.
That sounds good, James. And perhaps there may be a way of recycling or reusing that excess topsoil.
None of this will go to waste. Let me tell you. We run a circular household.
I'm very fortunate to have a very kind and generous husband, and in the day-to-day of our lives, I have this everyday kindness of bringing me coffee every morning and cooking some gorgeous meals most days of the week. So maybe not one of those big special moments, if you like, but those everyday gifts that keep on giving every week. So I feel very fortunate.
Oh, that's very wholesome.
Very jealous, Hege.
I think I'm going to bring the tone down slightly after that, but the only thing I can think of is I was going into a gig last week, and we're running a bit late, quite keen to get beer before the gig, and then the people behind the bar had already pre-poured a lot of pints, so gave me and my friends the pints for free, which was pretty nice, and also arguably an example of the circular economy. because otherwise we've just gone down the drain.
Fantastic, Ethan. Remind me to go out with you next time. That sounds great. Yeah. Well, Hege and James, brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing us those little anecdotes. And I think, but we're going to get into the topic of circular economy. But before we dive a little bit deeper into today's conversation, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you both found yourselves within, with circular economy as part of your job and day-to-day lives? Perhaps, James, you would like to go first?
Yeah, great. No, so it's a topic I've been working on for a while. So I joined Deloitte about a year ago, spent 8 years before that at the World Economic Forum, working on circular economy most of the time there. And I think I came into it from a bit of an interesting angle. So I used to be quite focused on China, and I still did do quite a lot of work with China, and I speak Mandarin, and also China and natural resources, obviously China being a big user of natural resources. And then I started looking more into the sort of sustainability aspects of that kind of quite early in my career. And what needs to be changed, seeing the growth that we're looking at in China and elsewhere in the world, what do we need to change about our economic system to make this work? And that's sort of what led me into the circular economy. And also my last role, I came across some really great advocates for the circular economy, like Ellen MacArthur, who has the foundation, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a great resource on this. Bill McDonough, who wrote Cradle to Cradle, which is a real foundational text. So some very inspirational people convincing me that this was a good idea as well. And I haven't looked back since.
Great. Thanks, James. How about you, Hege?
Well, I can almost share a bit of an unusual perhaps, because in my first career, I was a photographer and I was doing fashion, music, and portrait photography. And I have to say that there was a moment, and there's a reason I changed careers, which was when I was doing lots of fashion shoots and realized that I just felt like I was contributing to unnecessary levels of consumption. And it was just this kind of observing this linear model that I was at the time, or I felt like I was really part of fueling, that felt fundamentally unsustainable and not something I wanted to continue doing. And funny that you mentioned, James, the Cradle to Cradle book. That was one of the books that really sort of prompted me into starting to think completely differently. And after years of being in the social entrepreneurship space, I joined IKEA eventually about 8 years ago, first on the expansion side of sustainability and how we design retail spaces, but then also as head of sustainability in the UK and Ireland market. And of course, on the retail dimension, you can't, this day and age, not talk about circular economy when it comes to consumption and retail, and how you both design and products, but also how you provide solutions, right? So really exciting journey there. And I guess being based in London for many years and seeing and being part of the landscape of having so much high quality product in circulation around us. So it's just smart shopping as well, right? So there's so much going on. And since March this year, I joined our global sustainability team, leading on the sustainability strategy for Ingka Group, as was mentioned earlier. And really exciting time to really understand how businesses need to completely rethink how they operate, of course, how a company like IKEA, the world's biggest global furniture company, has to think differently about products and offers and services, and being on that journey. So yeah, huge potential, but also massive challenges, which I'm sure we'll explore a bit more in this podcast.
Yeah, really interesting way in there. And hopefully if you went back to some of those fashion shoots, it would be not quite as wasteful, making steps there, hopefully. I think it makes sense to kind of kick off with a bit of a description on what the circular economy is and how it's kind of different from just recycling, which I think is how a lot of people understand it. And also how it's different from how the economy operates today.
Yeah, I can jump in first, Hege, if that's okay. I mean, look, I think that, you hit the point there in terms of how the economy is today. And I think that's the first thing to look at, right? So we have an economy where essentially we dig things out the ground. So we dig materials, minerals, metals out of the ground. We make them into products. Sometimes we get things from nature as well. We make them into products. We sort of mix it all up into a product, which is brilliant and, gives us whatever, like telecommunications, a computer, clothes, all of these different things. And then we, at the end of its life, we put the materials back in the ground again, essentially in a landfill, right? In a way that isn't that pure form where you can use them and remake them into a product. And this is very much the linear economy because it goes in a line, from the ground to the ground without too much in between. Obviously a simplification, but that's essentially the system that we have. Now, what the circular economy looks to do is to break that and really stop our reliance on natural resources and decouple our economic growth from the extraction of natural resources. And there's three main principles to the circular economy. The first one is to design out waste and pollution. So if you're thinking about creating a product, think about its end of life. How's it going to be reused? How's it going to be recycled? Can you take any sort of toxic materials out of it to make it, if it goes to the wrong place, make it safer for humans? That's a really first key thing. So thinking about this and how it's designed into the economy. The second is about how you can extend life of products and also use them more intensely. So for instance, this is when repair comes in. If you can keep your computer for a few more years, you don't need a new one, or upgradability of a product, but also sharing as well. A car isn't used for 95% of the time. So something like a zip car means that you can share one car between 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 households, right? And then it becomes a more efficient use of resources. So that sharing part is really important as well. And then finally, the last piece is about how, firstly, you regenerate nature. So if there's any materials, biological materials, food waste, all of this goes back into nature, nourishes the soil to kind of grow new products, but also how you cycle materials back into the economy as well, which is that recycling part. So it's absolutely not recycling. And actually some of those other strategies, repairing, reusing, remanufacturing, sharing, not only provide more environmental value, because you're keeping those products in service for longer, but also more economic value. If you think about selling your old mobile phone, maybe you can get £100, £200, rather than if you just looked at the materials in it, which is important to recycle, probably worth about £2 to £3. So that's a kind of brief explanation from my perspective.
That's super helpful. Hege, do you have anything else to build on that?
No, I think I can maybe share from how we see it a little bit more like from an IKEA dimension, because of course, as James summarizes there, they're very much the principles that we also abide by and look into our strategies and how we look at how we can transform our business to becoming a more circular business. And it's easier said than done. It has to be, that's something to be very honest about. It's a complete rewiring, not just of our business model, but also the entire operating model of how we meet customers and how we design our products. But based on what James shared, we started to look already in 2018 what it would mean for how we would design our products going forward. So we've now set targets for how we can design all our products with what we call circular capabilities. And of course, most people will be very familiar with the flat pack concept of IKEA, love it or hate it, but that's very much part of the model of both keeping costs low, but also really optimizing the use of resources. So this idea of optimizing the use of resources and producing products sustainably has been at the core for many years. But the idea that not only can you assemble, but how do you design products to be simple to disassemble, to be designed for repair, to be designed for upcycling and multi-use. And that completely changes both how we meet our customers, but also the longevity of our relationship with customers, right? So you have to start to thinking about repair services. You start thinking about knowledge and competence of how you actually repair and upcycle. And, sharing an example, when we developed the IKEA Greenwich store in Southeast London, a few years back, we went out to the market and just also explored with younger generations to say, if we provided services to repair, upcycle, what would you do? Would you use them? How would you engage with that? And the interesting thing is, in a generation, we can see that we've lost a lot of skills, really basic skills around competence and confidence to even use a hammer and nails. We had a young couple saying, well, we call our dad, to come and put shelves up. So just sharing that, because of course you can have a designed approach and really an intention to design products and services in a certain way, which is what we are working on at the moment. But you also need to work with customers and people around what's relevant for them, where they are, what they are likely to use and how they're going to engage with it. But I would say, this is a big one. This is a big transformation journey for all of us.
Really interesting, and I can definitely testify from my own personal point of view that we've lost some of those skills, my generation and below, when it comes to kind of basic repair. But just before we kind of move on to some specific examples from other businesses, is there a bit of a fear in IKEA that if consumer behaviors do really change and people start reusing, let's say furniture, for an example, obviously one of the IKEA staples, is there a fear that there'll be drop-offs in things like revenue and growth?
I think you've got probably different opinions across the entire spectrum. You will have not just early adopters that are really excited about the change, and you go out and look at what's happening in the markets. It's very clear, certainly in Western markets and mature markets, that this secondhand movement, passing on products, whether it's peer-to-peer or direct-to-consumer, it's happening at scale, right? So it's very clear that the market is there. But of course, when you've been very successful for a very long time in a linear economy, and we won't be the only company that will have this legacy, right? So of course, there's a lot of concern as well of what it would mean. And although you can look at the business case on paper and the numbers look great, I think the reality of it, but also the fear of what will it do to our brand? What will it do to the core of the values of the purpose of the of the company? So both excitement, I would say, and obviously some concern. And there will always be those who try to almost hold back as well. But that's the nature of change, right? As well.
I think that's really interesting, Hege, and actually your point around understanding what customers want or consumers want, I think is key, and different circumstances or different events like a cost of living crisis may influence their decision making when they're purchasing products. And actually Deloitte conducted some research over the summer. We had a sustainable consumer report which asked 2,000 UK adults about how they made purchasing decisions and how sustainable they were. And I think 53%, or so more than half, claimed to have repaired their items instead of replacing them, which is a bit of a sign of the times. I think maybe the dial is shifting a little bit towards that. But James, I wanted to come to you actually, because it feels like both of you are heavily involved in this. But what's sort of been the driver in recent years to move towards a circular economy? And that's a sort of phrase which is increasingly being seen in the media. Has there been anything which has really been driving that from your perspective?
Thanks, George. I think first it's just brilliant what IKEA is doing. I mean, it's fantastic. Such a transformation and such an iconic brand doing this really just makes it real for people. And also providing those services as well is great. Even actually, I was putting up some shelves the other day. You can also rent and borrow drills as well and things like this. It's another circular economy example. If you need a power saw, for instance, which turns out I might need a power saw at some point soon.
Who doesn't need a power saw?
Exactly, yeah. But I'm only ever going to need a power saw once, right? So instead of buying a power saw, can you borrow it? Can you rent it? Which goes back to that sharing concept again. But just when you were speaking about tools then, Hege, I was thinking about my own experience renting some tools. But anyway, no, I mean, the drivers, yeah, it's a really good question. Personally, from where we're sitting, I see a lot. I mean, I think, George, you mentioned one there with consumers. I think waste and the problem with waste and our current economy is something that people really instinctively understand. I mean, you mentioned our consumer research. Every year this really comes out of the top. Things like plastics, people know where the plastic's in their house, how much they're buying, how much of it's going in their recycling bin, what they can't put in their bin, what in their recycling bin, what they can. They know what happens, what can happen with plastics. In my old role, we worked on a report which we predicted there'd be more plastic than fish in the ocean by 2050, which is a terrifying statistic. And these messages cut through. So I think consumers do understand it, and also consumers want durable, long-lasting products, and they want to cut down on waste. So I think that's one. I think regulation as well. I won't go into all of the details, but there's been definitely an increased push, particularly in the European Commission, whether that's banning certain packaging types, whether that's putting in place targets for reusable packaging, whether that's stating that all products will have to have a digital product passport, which will have information about the materials inside them, about how they'll be recycled. Many different policy levers are being pushed around the circular economy, and there's a real vision to transform to that.
And Hege, you sort of alluded to some examples that might be helpful to explain a bit more about the circular economy. What are some of your favourites?
How we've designed our retail outlets. As an example, when you come to an IKEA store today, you should meet a circular hub, which is part of the journey where you can buy and sell back, pre-loved IKEA furniture. And that's one of the things that we're working on at the moment. So moving from testing and trying these different campaigns and initiatives where we buy back IKEA furniture or enable people to more easily pass on existing furniture that they no longer want, how can we really scale that and make that part of the concept of what we offer everywhere? So that's one of the opportunities that we're looking at the moment, but also how we enable others in the ecosystem around us. One example is our shopping centre in Hammersmith, where we've partnered with Social Enterprise, which is one of a big fan. I've been a big fan for a long time, many years, right from when they started up in Crystal Palace, the Library of Things. I also have one down the road from me here in Bow, and use them all the time. Like you say, James, why would you want to own lots of stuff if it just sits and clogs up your storage? When many of us now live in small flats and we have limited storage space, so the idea that you can access the sort of things that you need, whether it's from a Library of Things type setup or whether it's peer-to-peer. So I think there is so much opportunity to think differently about ownership, but also about really being mindful around making things last and passing those on.
I completely agree, Hege. I mean, just to follow on from that, I mean, firstly, Library of Things, I hope they have a power saw because I'll be looking them up to go there. But no, I was going to say also, I mean, with that going back in a way, sometimes I do presentations on the circular economy. I sort of say, look, imagine that you're in a world where all of the things you need, all of the beverages you need for a day are delivered in reusable packaging by an electric vehicle right to your door. How great would that be? And then my next slide is a picture of a milkman. That was kind of the system in the 80s, right? But we've kind of moved away from some of these things. So sometimes there's some things in the circular economy which are difficult to do and are path breaking. And Hege, I think a lot of things you're doing at IKEA, there's many things in that category for sure. But then also there's some things where we've lost touch a little bit. And actually what we need to look at some of these different models that we used to have, which were more resource light, reused packaging, reused materials, made, mended, made do, all of these things, and really think about those as well.
I love that example, James. But on the other side of the spectrum, have you got any examples of any particularly innovative stuff that's maybe not taken from the 1980s that's really captured your imagination?
There's a lot of stuff out there, and I think I've done quite a lot of work in a number of areas on circular economy, but I do quite like the topic of electronic waste and looking at those sectors. And if you look at that space and what companies are doing to cut down electronic waste, there's some really interesting models out there, both from some of the major companies and from some startups as well. So, I mean, for instance, if you look at and we have a bit of a problem in electronic waste, we only formally recycle 17% of the world's electronic waste. The rest ends up in landfill, sometimes shipped abroad to developing countries, or just going into the informal sector and not really necessarily being taken care of. So we have a big issue. So we need to kind of cut that down. I mean, I think people might have seen now companies such as Backmarket. It's a relatively new startup, but it's kind of one of the first companies that's making renewed, recycled, remanufactured technology sexy. It's really got a great advertising campaign. It's talking about the environmental, the economic credentials, the fact that you can get tech for less and it's still this really good, high quality product. I think that's quite innovative. Partly their model's really innovative, but also that marketing around it.
That is really interesting, James, with some of those examples. Citing some more Deloitte data on this, published some research earlier in the year, which showed that in the UK alone, there are about 24 million smartphones tucked away in drawers and cupboards, old smartphones and old devices which people aren't using, which I think has a value of over £1 billion if they were to be plugged back into secondhand markets and things. But I think that alone just shows I think we could probably all relate to, think of the backs of some of our drawers, which probably have some of these old, I think I've got a mini disc player somewhere, but kicking around. But, some of these electronic devices that do sort of fill you with horror sometimes, I think. But
the mini disc might be for recycling, George. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably one. There's probably some lithium in there or something. But doing some reading around this ahead of this chat, the proponents of the linear economy, which I guess we're sort of responding to after 50 years of consumerism and adverts for the latest gadget and things like that. But the proponents of the linear economy would say that the circular economy might not be strong enough to create jobs or sustain jobs. Do you agree with that, or how would you sort of respond to those accusations?
I think I can jump in here to start with. I think the idea is that the economy is moving, either way. And just building on what James was saying earlier, as a resource intensive business model, which is what currently IKEA is today, we have to change. We know that we are disrupted and we are being disrupted by resource scarcity, geopolitical tensions, all sorts of dimensions that are coming at us, different consumer behaviors. Startups are also disrupting incumbents, right? So the idea is that we have to change. We see that. And these are the new skill sets. These are the new work opportunities and job opportunities that are creating the jobs of today and tomorrow. So I think we definitely see these are massive opportunities to remain relevant, both in the eyes of our customers, but also the different skill sets that are going to be required to be resilient as a business in the future that we face. And therefore, I'd also say that maybe we come to this. I think the whole just transition element is also really key around this movement towards a circular economy, not just in making sure that we bring everyone along with us, but also slightly more sensitively of the resource consumption levels between, say, the wealthy global north and the south. Emerging nations are arguably there to actually consume more to get up to a certain level of equality, but we need to really look at the consumption levels that we have in the West. But ultimately, these are massive growth opportunities in multiple dimensions that we need to live up to. So that's, I think, is a really key message to come forward with.
I completely agree. I mean, I think on both of those points, I think on the job creation side of things, if you can have that system, like Hege was saying in IKEA, if you can provide those repair services, there's a job creation opportunity there. And there's been a number of different studies by the European Commission, by other cities doing impact assessments that show if you do take a product back, you remanufacture it, it creates more skilled jobs. If you recycle it, it creates more jobs than if you landfill it, which creates less jobs. So there is a job creation opportunity here as well. And as Hege said as well, it's really important to think about that split between the developing economies and emerging economies and developed economies and their material footprint. We're actually doing a really interesting publication at the moment at Deloitte in collaboration with a Dutch NGO called Circle Economy. So we're partnering with them at a global level to look at the overall global material footprint. So that will be released in January. That's an ongoing report. There's been a number of years that's been going on for, but there'll be new numbers coming out in this January. And also we're doing this in the UK as well. So we're looking at the whole UK economy. We're looking at all of the material flows in, all of the use of materials in the economy, and then what happens to all of that afterwards, all of that material, how much is recycled back into the economy, and how much is landfilled, how much is burnt, how much is wasted, to really get a kind of full, as we call it, like metabolic picture of the UK as a whole. And we'll be releasing that in March, so I can't give away how circular the UK is, but I can say that there is still a way to go, right? We're not doing terribly in terms of the grand scheme of things, but it's still a very, very wasteful economy, and there's a lot of levers we can be pulling to really get more circular in the UK.
Yeah, jumping in there, James, we've been looking at the circular economy gap reports from Circular Economy for quite some time, and they're really useful also, right, to understand the different markets. We work across 32 different markets, so when we want to scale up certain solutions, we also need local legislation to be there and ready for us to scale and to have scalable and feasible business models across different market and country legislations. And I think it's also really key to understand the important part for a business also to map its metabolic flows, to understand where its footprint sits. And that's a process we're going through at the moment. And I think sometimes it's quite technical to think about how the circular strategy fits with the other environmental strategies. And of course, we need it to meet our net zero targets, but we also need it to address our footprint and impact on nature, as nature is, and biodiversity loss is also coming up as a bigger and bigger issue and an area for businesses and of course society as a whole, with just sort of dire statistics showing 68% nature loss in the last 50 years. So the circular economy is very much an enabler of how we will meet many of these goals and how we will also maintain resilience and new business opportunities, right, in this reality we face. So the more data that we have, more informed we are about the impact we have as a business, we can also address both where to take action and also where the opportunities are commercially also. So yeah, really excited that you guys are involved with that work also.
Did you know at Deloitte we buy goods and services from social enterprises, which contributes to our 5 Million Futures programme? From Babies with Love sells beautiful gifts for babies and gives the profits to orphaned and abandoned children around the world. Their ethically sourced designs help vulnerable children to grow up in safe, happy places. Do you know someone who is expecting? Why not treat them with a gift? From FromBabiesWithLove.org. Now back to our topic of the day. Just to change tack slightly, so I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. We've talked about consumers, and we joked, Hege, about not having any DIY skills, losing some of those basic competencies. And James, obviously, you mentioned that consumers are passionate about reaching kind of net zero and about the climate. How can we kind of reconcile those two things? Because on the one hand, there is consumer demand. But then on the others, consumer behaviors are probably not in line with that. Like we're used to just ordering things on Deliveroo, used to things being really easy. And the idea of maybe taking something back to a shop might not appeal. How can we kind of think about that from a consumer mindset point of view?
I'll jump in here, maybe to start with, James. I think what we see, of course, is that we have to make it accessible and easy for people. The idea that you will go out of your way and pay more for doing the right thing is just not really reality. And even if there is a kind of a wish position for that, there is this intention action gap when it really comes to reality. So, what we can do both from a company and brand perspective, but also societies to mainstream these type of behaviors and make sure that actually looking after and passing on our things is just the norm. And I think you see real movement on this from a Western perspective, at least, and also how companies are starting to really take this into their business models. And when I say Western perspective, it of course means that we have so much circulation of products. So there is a massive business opportunity there, and we have technology and everything we need to really move. And other markets have an opportunity to really design this in from an offset right from the start into their systems. What we've also looked at is to use sometimes our marketing muscle, if you like, to really drive demand also for the right type of behaviors, because we can't avoid the power of advertising. Sometimes that's sort of left a little bit out of the conversations when it comes to talking about circular economy. And then we also need to see the legislations really enabling and balancing out the role of business versus the role of just how movements and the incentives of how businesses are doing the right thing. So there's multiple roles of the actors in the system to really make it easy and mainstream and the new normal, if you like.
And it feels like business is an important part here, and we've heard about what IKEA is doing, which is fantastic as a B2C organization. But what role can business play in all this? What can firms of any size, organizations of any size, do to help drive the circular economy?
Well, obviously, starting with the sustainable production and consumption direction of, SDG 12. So whatever the company's sphere of influence is in that space, so how to deliver to that. But I think starting with what the services and the purpose of the firm and the sector you're in, there's opportunities across the value chain and across the ecosystem. And we are, of course, I haven't mentioned actually some of the examples of where we're investing in startup ecosystems, capacity in the system around us, not just to turn or support us in becoming circular as a company, but equally working together with the other actors in the system. So, one example is that in Holland, where again, it must be said, the legislative environment has been particularly helpful, but we've been able to close the loop on all recycled mattresses at the country level with an investment in a company called Retour Matras. And it's, of course, one product out of very many and lots of different material streams. But that's one type of investment slightly outside of our core business model, if you like. And most companies will have an opportunity to look at what they procure, what they design, what they sell, the competence and knowledge that they share amongst not only their suppliers but also their co-workers. So there is enormous opportunity, and there's a role for everyone to play in that system. It's more of a willingness to step in and do the analysis and understand where the biggest levers are, depending on where the company fits. But we all need to play a big part in this. It's a systemic approach, right? It's collaborative. No one can become circular on their own. And that's another different dimension to it as well. It's sort of really taking radical collaboration to a whole new level.
The process we often go through with our clients is, as Hege was saying before, is measuring, really understanding where you are, setting that strategy, having targets, understanding where to start and what to prioritize. Piloting, sometimes it's good just to really get started and try things out. It can't always be perfect to start with, and then also looking where to collaborate as well is really important. So when we talk about it with clients, there's two of the key things are the sort of the value chain, everything in your value chain, going back through your supply chain, how products are designed, what you procure, all of that, and then the ecosystem. So like Hege said with the mattress example, so what's the ecosystem around you, the innovation ecosystem, recycling, product reuse ecosystem, and you need to think about how you collaborate with that value chain, how you collaborate with that ecosystem, and how you can really scale up jointly with others and also internally as well.
How about from an individual level? If someone listening to this podcast really inspired, wants to get involved in the circular economy, where do you think they should start?
Food and clothing, right? We all need food and clothing. And I think one example is particularly based in London, but you really do not arguably need to buy anything new ever again. And you don't have to renege on your customer experience. Even if you look at platforms like Vestiaire Collective, as an example, the user experience is incredibly high, and you can really get access to, whatever you need secondhand from that perspective. Not to say that we should discourage people buying new if they really need something or want something. But I think from a personal dimension, you can do a very simple, quick audit of all the things that you, as a household, procure and consume in your day-to-day and assess where that sits. James mentioned a refurbished phone before. I've been a Fairphone customer for right from the beginning. So there are certainly so many ways to get involved at a local level and also involved locally in sort of a lot of the initiatives that households can be involved with are also really hyper-local. You mentioned Lewisham Council, James, but of course it is about how do we cycle back materials in our local environments. And of course in the UK in particular, it's not the same for all countries, but the local food recycling infrastructure is incredibly scattered. So what we can also do is to really lobby our local governments and ask for unified systems that allows us to participate in a meaningful way, and informing ourselves as a start, and then taking small actions is also the next opportunity.
That's fantastic, Hege. I'm reminded of, there's a scene from Futurama, which is the cartoon set in the year 3000, and the main character's wandering around this sort of, he's from the past, he's in the future, and everything's recycled, and his friend explains it to him that clothes are recycled from old clothes, cars are recycled from old cars, and I think supermarket sandwiches are made from old discarded sandwiches. So maybe there's a sort of lesson there which we can all think about. But James and Hege, conscious of time, so we're going to wrap things up. As always, we have to finish by asking you once again, in a nutshell, the big question of this episode, which is, would more of us thrive in a circular economy?
So yes, I think, everything we've discussed about today, having that better access to products, hopefully at a lower price point as well with secondhand products, being able to repair, keep things durable, and also have less of an environmental footprint as well, and partake in the magic that is the circular economy, I think is a great thing for everyone.
For me, it's an absolutely resounding yes. And I think, leaning in and proactively embracing it, whether as an individual or a company, is far better than being pulled into the future, kicking and screaming, if you like. Legislation will get us there either way, but also the environmental impact and the realities of resource scarcity. So better make it a positive movement, right, that we can all benefit from and participate.
Thanks so much for joining us both. I'm going to head out and get some lunch and look for a secondhand sandwich, but it's been great to talk to you today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Hege.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We'll be back next time with another big question. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by George Parrett, Lizzie Elston and Ethan Worth. Thanks to our creative studio for their technical support. Original music by Ali Barrett from our consulting team.